Hi, I'm P.W. Huntington. I founded Huntington Bank 158 years ago on the idea of building strong local connections. It's great to see our growth across the country, and now in the Carolinas. The bankers we've hired are local, and we think they're the best of the best. Let me say we're thrilled to be here, and I could get used to the blue Carolina skies.
To celebrate Black history, the Post and Courier is presenting its 5th series of video interviews featuring 12 dynamic leaders to know in South Carolina. We talk to people from all over the state about their efforts to advance democracy and justice, celebrate Black culture and enterprise, and address community needs. Our videos are released monthly through January 2026. To watch and to read our 12 profiles, go to postandcourier.com/Black History. I'm Adam Parker. Join me again this year in learning about some of our state's remarkable change agents. Alana Jenkins.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
It's very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
And we are here at your school in the big classroom.
Yeah.
And how's it going? You just opened, right?
Yeah, so we opened Sea Island Heritage Academy in August of 2024. So we are about, 6 months or so in. And
it's your first full year.
It is our first full school year. And it's been incredible, right? We've had some challenges, as all new schools do, right?
You're
we
a
can
startup.
It's right, as any startup has, right? There have been some challenges, but I think what has been incredible is that we've seen incredible academic growth in kids so far.
In 6 months?
In 6 months. In math, they grew on average 2 years. 2 years.
In 6 months?
In 6 months.
Okay, wait a minute. So let's back up.
Yeah.
This is a new charter school on
Yes.
Ladies Island.
Yes.
I guess it's within the city of Beaufort?
Well,
is
we're
it
in
its
Beaufort
own-
County, but
Beaufort
we're
County.
authorized by the state, right? So
Right.
we are a state charter school. So, if you live in Yemassee, you're welcome to come, right? As well as if you live in Beaufort County.
And you're in a kind of temporary but fairly accommodating space here.
Yeah, we're in
behind a church.
Behind a church, right? Grace AME, we love them, and we love the AME church. So yeah.
And they've given you a piece of their parking lot, I guess,
Yep.
which is terrific. And how many students do you have enrolled?
Right now we have about 40 students enrolled.
So you already have 40 students, and they're 7th graders or something,
So
middle grade?
it's middle school, right? So we started with grades 6 and 7, and each year we'll add. So right now we're in the middle of our enrollment. So we're going to be enrolling for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade next year.
Okay, and then eventually you'll get to 12th.
Eventually you get to 12th.
So this will be a middle school, high school, secondary school.
It's secondary school, right? And that was a super intentional choice of ours. We did a lot of community co-design meetings. It took about 10 months of designing the school that really only focused on working with community members, right? And we would have monthly community co-design sessions where people would say, these are the priorities, assets, and goals that we want to see for our key stakeholders. And in doing that, we were able to identify that middle school and high school is really where we are losing our kiddos, right? And so this was an effort towards making sure that our kids are going to be able to be most supported in the time where it's most challenging, and then really be able to grow and thrive and do all the things that they deserve to do.
Tell me about the demographics of this area. What is the population you're serving? What is the growth opportunity here? What's the need?
Yeah. So Beaufort County is it's a county that's kind of split in two by the Broad River.
Yeah.
So you have the north of the Broad River and south of the Broad River. South of the Broad River, you have areas like Bluffton, like Hilton Head that are growing a lot. They're growing a tremendous amount. But in northern Beaufort County, the area that's actually growing the most is an area called the St. Helena region, right, which includes St. Helena and Ladies Island, as they're both unincorporated Beaufort County areas.
Got it.
And so there is incredible growth opportunity here. There are there are a lot of
The people are
families.
coming.
Yeah, the people are coming, right? And what's more important, the people who are coming, there are people who are here, and people whose families have been here for hundreds of years. And our goal at Sea Island Heritage Academy is to really, really leverage those assets that already exist in the local community and making sure that we amplify their voices, amplify their experiences. So when we look at the demographic of our students, we have about, I would say, like 96% of our students are African American, and they come from the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor and communities like St. Helena. Actually, St. Helena is really interesting. I'm sure everybody knows about the CPO, the Cultural Protective Overlay that exists on St. Helena, right? Because of the Gullah Geechee culture that's so
The Penn Center is
the Penn Center is
located
there, right? Like we are built in the legacy of the Penn Center, right? Really making sure that self-determination, self-actualization is at the core of our work, right? And when you look at our student body, we actually were able to recruit about half of St. Helena Elementary School's graduating class. Right? And so we were really intentional about saying, we're going to place ourselves on Ladies Island right now because this is where our temporary home is. Our permanent home is going to be on St. Helena because when St. Helena had an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school, it allowed for the community to thrive in ways that right now, it's not consistently seen across all demographics on the island.
I mean, the school was a pillar of the community.
Yes.
One of the major pillars of the community: the church, the family, the school, and with that sort of erosion over, I don't know, the last, well, since desegregation, really.
Yeah, I was going to say,
right? There's been a little bit of a void.
Yep. And so we've seen that void, right? And for me, in the work that I've done, what I really looked at is two things, right? I looked at the data for students and how they're performing in traditional public schools here. Yep. And I also looked at like the economic success of different demographic areas. What a lot of people don't know is that there's about a $45,000 income gap between what it means to be Black and what it means to be white on St. Helena Island. Right, that's huge, right? It's huge. It's huge, and especially in a place like South Carolina, right, where the average person is making about $50,000 a year. It's not average in Beaufort County because Beaufort County is one of the wealthiest counties in South Carolina, which is an important fact for later, right? But it is important when you look at those two facts. And the question is, how are we setting up our students to be successful long term, to be able to see their cultural identity and to be able to see themselves and say, okay, I know who I am and I know where I'm going because of that, right? And at Sea Island Heritage Academy, our goal is really to set the foundation for students to do that, right? When we think
it's really about self-empowerment, I guess, in part.
Yes.
Understanding your identity and where you're coming from, and then leveraging that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what about that? So you have roots here, actually.
Yeah.
You lived in New York City, it should be said,
yes.
And worked in New York City in education. Tell me a little bit about New York.
I grew up in New York, right? My parents were born and bred in the Bronx, right? My grandparents are from like the Embassy area. My grandfather was born in Whitehall. My grandmother grew up in Savannah, and so. We would take what I would call like our yearly pilgrimage, right, to the South, right? We would jump in our car, spend 12 hours eating a bunch of junk food and hearing stories about our family. And that's how I felt so connected to this space. Yeah. But you asked about...
This is basically every year?
Every year,
as a kid,
as a kid. Yeah, I actually have a really clear memory. I think it was of Matthew. It was one big hurricane. Mm-hmm. And we were staying, we weren't staying at our family, we were staying at a hotel. And all the electricity went out. And my brother might have been 1 or 2 years old. And me and my dad, my mom did not want us to do this. We snuck out and we went to get ice cream. And it was really fun, right, for me because we went to go get ice cream
in
the hurricane because all of the refrigerators stopped working.
They had to give it away.
They had to give it away. Yeah. And so me and my dad sat in the car and we had like 2 things of ice cream and it was a really, really great time, which is not to say that there's, the impacts of climate change is terrible, right? And so, but that is a memory that really, I don't know,
as the houses were collapsing on either side
right,
of you,
like
but you're in the car with your ice cream.
Exactly, right. That's exactly what was happening. But in New York, I leaned really very quickly into education, right?
How come?
I come from a family of people who are just committed to social change, right? My father is currently the county executive for Westchester County. He's actually the first Black county executive for Westchester County, and the first picture of me that I ever saw was me at about 2 months old. My dad was holding me at an NAACP meeting, right? Where he was a president, where he worked at desegregating the school system and in Yonkers. And
that's a famous case.
It is. It is a famous case, right? And he was the president of the NAACP at the time then. And so.
So you grew up with this sense of social justice
exactly, like a sense of social justice and a sense that there's a lot of ways to address social justice, right? But for me, the only way that has real lasting change is through that self-empowerment that you were sharing before, and that only comes through schools, right? And that's my personal opinion, right? I'm sure there's a lot of other ways to address it.
You and Septima Clark.
Right, right, but like I think that is like the way to really make meaningful, lifelong change in humans. And it may be a little bit of a slower route, right? Because you need time to make that happen. But also, when you talk about having, 2 grade levels of growth in 6 months, there's also some really fast growth that can happen there too.
That's exciting.
And so I knew that education was where my heart was. And so I started teaching. I taught 6th grade reading and writing at a charter school in Bedside, Brooklyn. It was an all-boys charter school. It was about 98% Black because it was in the middle of Bedside. And I taught 6th grade young men the joy of reading, right? Which I can tell from your face. You're like, what? 6th grade boys don't like reading, right?
Well, why not?
Exactly, that's what I said, right? Like, there's no reason for you not to like reading if you can find yourself in text, right, in the text. And I always say, like, I became a reading teacher because I like books, right? And I like talking about books, and I like getting people excited about books. So
what kind of books would you assign them? I'm just curious.
Yeah, one of my favorite books was Warriors Don't Cry. So it is a story of Melba Pattillo Beals, and she was a member of the Little Rock Nine.
Yeah.
And that it's a memoir. And what was fantastic about that book is here you have a group of like 30-something young men, right? And they're hearing the story of a young woman who has had life in the world tell her no so many times, and they saw her themselves in her.
Sure.
Right? And they were able to talk about the challenges that she experienced, which is such passion and such foresight for 11-year-olds, right? And they would sit at tables like similar to this, and we would have Socratic seminars, right? Where we just get one question and we throw it out there. And you have an inner circle and an outer circle. And the inner circle, they're the ones who are talking, but the outer circle are giving them feedback on the conversation that they're having, right? And so there was this like double meta level of thinking that happened that just was really great to see. So Warriors Don't Cry was one of my favorite books to teach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah, it was a great book.
Wow, they must have had fun doing that.
They did.
So why didn't you just stay in New York and keep doing that?
Well, I moved from a reading and writing teacher. I became a dean of students at a high school, and so that meant
administrator?
An administrator.
Is that fun?
Well, no, it's not. It's not as much fun as being with kids every day. It's 100% not. But somebody has to do it. Number one, and also like I actually saw my role as a dean of students, right, which is dealing with discipline, right, as an advocacy role for students. Right? Because when you're in trouble, nobody wants to listen to what a 9th grader has to say. And I was being put in a position that allowed for me to hear what kids have to say and really say, okay, how can we advocate for you now and teach you how to advocate for yourself later so that the situation becomes different, right? In the school that I was in, we went from having about 25% of the student body in the detention twice a week to like decreasing suspensions by 80% and decreasing like out of class referrals by 60%. Wow. And we were able to do that by really like front loading relationships and front loading that advocacy work and doing so in a structural way. that school was also really important to me in terms of thinking about community, right? Because they were truly the all-boys school. They were part of a larger school network. This school, Coney Island Prep, was a single-site charter school. And they really focused on community. I mean, their name, very similarly to ours, right, is Coney Island Prep. It was about the community. They started off in the multi-purpose room of a housing projects, right? And so they were really, really deeply rooted in community. And we were able to see long-term changes in kids because of that, right?
We have hurricanes here, and they had a cyclone.
Yeah,
nearby.
Yes, they did have a cyclone nearby.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the roller coaster.
Yeah, I know the roller coaster.
So
yeah.
It's the same.
It's the same.
Exactly.
It's the same. And I saw some real incredible work there as Dean of Students. But as we were able to get discipline in classroom management in a consistent place, it was illuminating the challenges academically, right?
Changes everything.
It does, right?
But why? What was it exactly that was happening that encouraged the kids to behave better?
It had very little to do with the kids. It had a lot more to do with the adults,
okay.
right? And
how you respond.
How we responded, how we taught adults how to respond with and to children, right? We lived in a world before that was like, okay, child turns around and talks 3 times, you're out of the classroom.
Right.
Now you're losing learning time. It's super punitive, super fast, super transactional, and that's not how people work, right? And so
and that's not how every kid even behaves or interacts. Like, kids are different.
Yeah, and we kind of change our mindset to this philosophy of Dr. Ross Greene, and he says, essentially, nobody wakes up every morning and wants to do the wrong thing, right? Kids are trying their best, right? And we need to help them as adults.
Yeah.
And it's really changing the mindset.
Or sometimes they're reacting to something else that maybe not even be at the school.
Exactly. But it's our job as the adults to be the consistency, right? It's our job as the adults to have the emotional constancy to be able to hear what a child actually needs. And it's hard. It's really hard work. And teachers were not happy about it, to be clear.
Right.
It was a hard couple of months.
It's a lot easier to say,
get out of my classroom than it is to say, like,
you're being disruptive.
Than to say, like, okay, what is the harm that's happening here, and how are we going to make it right? And so here at Sea Island Heritage Academy, we've adopted a lot of that, right? And so it's really practicing restorative practices. And when a student, they have a challenge, right? Something happens, you're being disruptive, right? You may need to be out of class for a little bit, but your time out of class requires you to reflect and then discuss how you're going to make it right. And then that conversation also then has to happen with the teacher involved, right? Like, how does a child need to make this right so that we can all move forward, and because you, teacher, are also a human, right? So we can move forward and be successful the next day.
But you're behind the kid as the kid is working through this issue or whatever. I'm assuming the one of the reasons for the success is that he or she knows that you have their back.
Yes.
That there's this support system in place. That it's not just wagging your finger and being punitive. It's working collaboratively.
Yeah, it's working collaboratively, and it doesn't mean that there's not consequences. Like, there are consequences, right? And
I guess there has to be.
There has to be, but that's because that's the world, right? And there's accountability for the actions that you take, right? And so with that accountability, we have to make choices, and it doesn't need to be punitive. It doesn't need to be. It can look like, I'm spending a bit of the day reflecting. I'm spending a bit of the day learning about different ways that I can process my frustration, right?
Go read that poem right now and tell me what you think about it.
And like, that's not gonna work, right? That's not gonna work. You need to think about, right, exactly. It's like, how do we create the language for kids? Because, I didn't have the language, and I'm sure that, like, we all didn't have the language. We have to give them that language so that they can be able to say, this is how I feel about something, and this is why I'm reacting about this thing. And it's incredible when we see that, and we've seen that with a number of our students here, right? At Sea Island Heritage Academy, we're a startup, right? So we have students who have a wide variety of experiences, right? But the thing that we hear consistently from our parents is, this school has been the place where my scholar has been the most successful out of any educational experience that they've had, right? And it's not because we are putting on a magic show every day, right? It's because
You're rolling up your sleeves.
We're rolling up our sleeves, and we're building a foundation of trust, right, with kids and families, and we're gonna say, look, these are our expectations. Our expectations are not gonna change, right? What do we need to do to help you get to those expectations, right? And that, I think, is something that in the educational system, right, big E education, we have not consistently done. Right? We've said, okay, you can't meet this expectation, so let me lower the expectation, let me change the expectation. Right. And people will do exactly what you expect them to do every single time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. They'll step up. You just got to give them the tools.
Exactly.
That's what education is, I guess, right?
It's funny, right? Because so charter schools are supposed to be are innovative, right, by nature, and it's always hard for me when I think of like what is our innovation, right? Because we're not like an aviation school or like a school where you're gonna, have a maker space every place. Like that's not what we do, right? Our innovation is kind of going back to the tools and back to the basics, right? That says like, what used to happen in that one-room schoolhouse before desegregation that used to work, right? It was the accountability, it was the trust, and it was the rolling up your sleeves and saying, we're going to do this together, and there's not an excuse for you not to do this.
And the community, too, because the whole community was paying attention.
Exactly.
And the kids couldn't really get away with too much.
Yeah, and that's kind of why we exist in this room, right? So, like, we have all 40 students in this large classroom, and we have 3 teachers in this classroom in 3 separate spaces, right? And they're teaching all in small groups, which is how you get that really large.
Sounds kind of Montessori-like.
You know what? That's what we like. We say we're Montessori-ish, right? Because there are things in Montessori that I think work really well, but when you look at her research, when she gets to secondary, that becomes a little muddied, right? And I think it's because middle schoolers are a little bit muddier, right? And we need to figure out what works and what doesn't. And I was a dean of students, so I like rules. I like rulesy rules sometimes, right? And these are the boundaries, and if we work within the boundaries, then we can have a lot of gray on the outside.
Yeah. And even move things around within.
Exactly, right? And I think like it's an incredible space, this room, because when we were talking in professional development about what we wanted the space to feel like with our educators, they kept saying this buzz. We want a buzz, and in this room, like a buzz of learning, right? And this classroom has
a beehive.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you hear for people who come in, it may feel overwhelming for a moment, right? Because it's sometimes loud, right? There's a lot of groups, there's a lot of movement, right? But isn't that the world in which we're most successful, where everybody is like moving together, right, towards a singular goal, but everybody has their own goals, their own missions, right? And that's where we kind of create in this classroom.
Well, I mean, the kids are focused on what they're doing, right?
Focused.
So
focused.
Then it doesn't really matter.
Exactly, right? And it's like I as the adult have to recalibrate my brain for it, but like, wouldn't it be great for us to have a world of adults who don't need to recalibrate their brain for collaboration, right? And like that's what we're seeking to do, right? Like
there's always going to be a little bit of recalibration.
Sure,
like any circumstance.
Yes. But the thing about kids is that they're really fast, and like kids were able to catch on like day one.
So you're super optimistic, I guess. I mean, you seem very optimistic to me. Like this is working, basically.
Yes, I think, I was a fellow, right, with this organization called BES for a year while we were building the school, right? And they used to stand for Building Excellent Schools. They now stand for Build, Excel, Sustain, and they support school leaders across the country, right? So they know how to build charter schools. Like it's a thing that they've done over and over and over again. And part of the work of that fellowship is to visit really high quality schools. And not only charter schools, right? High quality public schools, high quality private schools. In fact, I spent a lot of time in some of the most expensive private schools in the country to really see what is working and really understand, right? And what we're doing here, I haven't seen it anywhere, right? Which was, it's a little less terrifying now, but which was deeply terrifying, right? Because what if it doesn't work, right? What if
There's a reason nobody else is doing this.
Maybe there's a reason that nobody else is doing this, but the thing is, I think we were able to hit this incredible intersection of incredible teachers, right? The average teacher in this classroom, there are only 3 of them, has been teaching for about 20 years, right? But they're all looking for something different, right? And like you have to have a passion about education.
Yeah.
And that's important to me.
Well, if you're in it for 20 years and you're still looking for a good opportunity, I guess that's an indicator.
Yeah, yeah. And so like we have this intersection of incredible teachers, incredible families, right, who have committed to the process. Because I know we talked earlier, look, we didn't have our building for the first month, and we didn't lose any families during that first month, right? And that's because our families were with us. They were like, okay, we know this is going to be, look, we know this is going to be a challenge, but we are with you, right? We have incredible support, right, both in the local community because of those community co-design sessions that we've done before, but also in the educational philanthropy world, because this is not possible without that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because to be clear, in South Carolina, as a public charter school, we are not getting enough funding to be able to support what we are doing, right?
You have to rely on the private sector.
We have to rely on the private sector, which is really a challenging place to be, right? And
but it's growing in South Carolina, and there are people, a growing number of people, I think, who want to support schools like this.
Exactly, exactly. And so when people come and they see kids like just really deeply invested in their learning process, it's incredible, right? We didn't get a chance to like look around the school a little bit, but when you go outside, there's a wall of student names, and they have these little folders that they every week find work that they want to put in there, right? And you talk about empowerment. It's a real clear pathway towards that for us, because kids are taking ownership in their work, right? In ways that, you know, I may think that there's a better piece of work that they've done this week, but they didn't work as hard as a piece of paper that they put in that folder. You know what I mean? And sure,
so it's a reflection of their pride.
It's a reflection of their pride, and we're seeing so many kids just feel so deeply like filled with pride and sense of self in ways that they haven't before, right?
It's
like
amazing.
We have students who were in alternative school settings, right? We have students with disabilities, right, who just have said like, I feel seen. And I feel like I can't hide here in a way that I don't have to hide here, right? And they have complete ownership of their academics in a way that they just, look, they have an iPad that has a personalized learning plan on it. They know where they're going, they know what they're doing, they know where they have gaps at, and they can discuss and talk about their education in ways that, like, I want my own sons to do.
It's interesting. It sort of goes to show you how important the environment itself is in fostering learning and fostering self-confidence and all of that. You know, if kids feel like they're in a nurturing, safe place and the teachers have their back and they're engaged and they have interactions that are positive and productive, then they're going to just do better. They're going to want to do better.
Yes. Isn't it so simple?
Yeah, it's so simple.
And it's
ridiculous, actually.
Right? Which is why I go back to like the innovation. It's like, look, we just love our kids, we work hard, and we believe in our community.
The other fascinating thing to me is how you're marrying, correct me if I'm overstating this, you're marrying this kind of old cultural, traditional approach to education.
Yep.
With best practices employed today, and you know, the numbers and the statistics and everything you've learned about and all the observations you've made in other schools and so on.
Yeah.
You're bringing that to bear. So these kids are having the benefit of both kind of this cultural rootedness, which once upon a time anyway fostered excellence and achievement.
Yep.
And it still does, of course, in places.
It's
just less consistent.
Yeah.
And then this new model, which of course is not that new, but it's
it's really a return, right? Like, it's a return to all of those one of the school that I used to work for is Uncommon Schools, right? And so they're big for like Doug Lamov, Teach Like a Champion, right? And so it's interesting because for Teach Like a Champion, the first version of it, he went to some of the highest performing public schools across the country and saw what those teachers who have been teaching for 35 years have been doing, right? It wasn't anything special, right? He just took it and created a playbook from it. And systematized it in a way that says anybody could actually become a great teacher if you are practicing some of these habits. And so I think we kind of believe the same thing here, right?
Sure.
Every scholar has the opportunity to reach their scholarly potential if the environment itself is created so that they can do so. And it is our job as the adults to do that, right? When we talk about like our professional development here, we put a lot of onus on adults, right? We talk about kids, we talk about some of the challenges that they have, sure. But at the end of the day, it's on us as the adults in the room to make the choices that are going to make sure that they're going to be successful, right? And at the end of the day, I have an incredible staff of people who care deeply about kids. And not only do they care deeply about kids, but they take on a level of ownership of their success, right? And of their failures. We found out about that tremendous growth of students, right, through their MAP testing, right? So they took a MAP test when they first came, and they've have skyrocketed in math specifically. They've done really well in ELA, about a year of growth, but they've done 2 years of growth in math. And it was when they were taking the test, when you take math tests, you immediately get to see your score, right? And you can compare from where you were to where you are now. And so there was one day where they were taking the test, and I was sitting in my office, right, which is a shared office because everything's collaborative here. And I was in the middle of Zoom calls and doing, my thing. And throughout the day, I would just have kids knock on the door and be like, Miss Jenkins, Rachel. I'm like, yes, what is it that you need? They're like, 10 points. I went up 10 points, right? Another kid comes in. I went up 22 points, right? And we would have like the math teacher come over, and she's like, Miss Jenkins, Marshall, I got some news for you. I got to bring this kid over to you. And I cannot believe it, right? And we would talk about this wonderful scholar who we're talking about just right in front of their face, to saying all the good things about them and all the growth that they've had. And then I would say, well, what is it that you have to tell me, right? And they were like, I grew this amount, right? And they were just so proud. Yeah. And that matters so much, right? And like, not often enough do kids have the opportunity to feel that, right? And to feel celebrated for the successes and growth that they've had, especially when you're in an environment where it's a larger school, right? Where you can become invisible, and the kids who are growing may not be the kids who get the most attention. You know what I mean?
Right. And in many ways, these, relatively speaking, small victories add up. And all of a sudden, before too long, these kids are full of self-confidence. Like, they know that they can do this. Yeah. They've got this.
They've got this, right? Like, it's been incredible to watch the kids. So you talk about my optimism. It's not my optimism, it's my trust in the babies, right? Like, I trust them to be able to shine, right? And to be able to say, like, this is who I am, and I'm gonna work my hardest. You should have seen them. We're what, 4 days into a snowmageddon, right?
Such as it is.
Right, and the day before, this room was just like a silent workspace of 40 kids, just like working their tails off writing an essay so they'll be prepared before they have to go into e-learning, right? We only had a handful of kids not show up to e-learning. How often does that not happen, right? Like, they just want to be around, right? Because they trust that the adults in our space, in this educational experience, not only like care about them as humans, right? Want to check in, see how their weather is, how is it going, not like the physical weather, but their emotional weather, but also like they know that the hard work pays off. Yeah. And they see the successes in the hard work.
Wow. So, okay, where you building up the grades as you go.
Yeah.
Next year you'll add students. The year after that you'll add more students. You'll eventually get from 6th to 12th grade.
Yep.
You have land on St. Helena Island that you've identified, and
Yep.
now you just have to build a building?
Yeah, isn't that the small things,
That's it,
right?
no big deal.
Yeah.
Right, how much money do you need?
Yeah, well.
So if anybody wants to write a big check, that would be great, because then
Always.
we'll be able to have a building. And forging ahead, I guess. How do you like it here compared to New York?
It's a new home. I expect to live here for the rest of my life, right? I like to say that I do this work so that we can build capacity and community, so that I can just sit on my porch and drink tea all day, right? That's what I want to do. I love this work, but drinking tea and sitting down doing nothing is
also good.
Is also good, right? I met my husband here, right? I'm growing my family here. This is my home.
Yeah.
I miss things not being open all the time, right?
Or late enough.
Or late enough, right?
Yeah.
I miss the lack of variety in food choices,
Yes.
right? I sometimes want a really good salad, and this is a hard place to get it, but that doesn't overshadow the joy that I get from being able to drive up, because I live on St. Helena, right? So drive up MLK and see a church having a fish fry and being able to get out my car, support our local community, and also have a delicious meal,
Yeah.
right? And so there are things that I miss, but this is home,
Yeah.
right? And it's a return home in a way that has been so filling in ways that I couldn't anticipate, right? Because when I first moved here part-time in 2018, right? After my grandfather passed away. And my intention was only to have this as a part-time place, right? There were no televisions in my home. I had like 20 minutes from the beach. Like, this is perfect, right? But what really kind of got me stuck here, right? Because it does this to people, it pulls them in, is during COVID, right? I came down, and when I did, the thought was, okay, I'm going to be here for an extended vacation. But
then you couldn't leave.
I couldn't leave, right? And I started doing research, because I'm a big old nerd. So I'm like, let me understand what education looks like here. And I was scared, right? I'm like, we have some work to do here, right? And so I began to talk to people, and just really being able to understand what the work is that needs to be done, and again, roll up the sleeves and do some things about it. You know what I mean?
So you took the bull by the horns, I see.
You know, you got to do what you got to do.
You do what you got to do.
I guess that's the New Yorker in me, right?
You do what you got to do.
It's exactly.
It's good to have a bagel and cream cheese nearby.
Sure.
But
what's better is to look. I grew up on Gullah Gullah Island, right? Like the TV show Gullah Gullah Island,
yeah.
right? And there was a moment where I realized that St. Helena was essentially Gullah Gullah Island,
Yeah.
right? And I grew up in a family that has been so intentional about sharing about our history and our family, and it has allowed me to be filled with so much pride of myself, right? So that I'm able to be in any space and feel confident. And it was sad to me to see that wasn't what was used to leverage academic success, right? Like there is an inherent, there's inherent richness in this place. And yet we are not using it to see the assets that already exist and to make sure that kids feel seen.
I don't know that everybody, especially all the young people, feel that necessarily, you know?
Yeah.
That confidence and all of that. That has to be built back up, which you're doing.
We're trying our best.
Well, it's very impressive, and thank you for sharing your story with us. This is quite interesting and incredible.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see what happens in the years to come here.
We're at our very, very inception, so please follow along, and
We will.
we're excited to
We will be in
grow.
touch. Please stay in touch with us.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you, Adam.
Alana Jenkins, it's a pleasure.
Yes.
Thank you.